may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, to be completely honest, my dudes, this is one of my favorite video ideas that we have had in a while. This was actually brought to y'all by Tommy over there on Patreon, wanting us to go through and look at some of these very interesting running back stats. Now, of course, he did not send us these stats. We went out there and we already had a few of these under our belts that we've found while we've gone through and researched for our 2021 fantasy football draft guide. But yeah, we had to go dig deep, look for a few other interesting stats that I think definitely should affect your player evaluation this upcoming season. And I promise you guys, every single one of these is true. Of course, you can go out there, you can fact check me on it. I know you're probably not going to believe me with a lot of these, but yeah, this all comes from that draft guide. This comes from everything that we have done up until this point. And please, if you have any other interesting running back stats that you know, I doubt y'all know that many off the top of your head, so I'm sure that we'll only get one or two down in the comment section. But if you have anything that you think I missed out on that's interesting, please go down to the comment section, let me know, and I'll be very interested to see what y'all can come up with, because it was pretty hard to get together this list. And of course, while you're down there, go down there, drop the like. I mean, we have been crushing the like button over the past few weeks. I mean, every single video getting over 200 likes the first day it's uploaded. So we continue to have those timestamps on the videos. And yeah, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, but I'm sure everybody watching this is subscribed by now. And yeah, let's dive into it. And our first stat is going to be Josh Jacobs, who most people know as a running back that doesn't get usage on passing downs, a running back that is mainly a first and second down grinder, and that's why you find him in the 4th round, 5th round of some fantasy drafts this year. Well, Josh Jacobs doubled Nick Chubb's targets per game mark last year. So Nick Chubb last year had 1.5 targets per game, which it's so hard to go through and give you some context on what that actually means, because Nick Chubb with only 1.5 targets per game is laughably low. I mean, that is almost unbelievable. And that's something that I'm going to be completely honest, I'm going to have to fact check myself on this one, because as we say this out loud, there's no way that this is true. So maybe we'll do this as we talk about it. Let me go over and pull up the Nick Chubb stats, but that's what we have here. And if you're looking at Nick Chubb and his 1.5 targets per game, I mean, that is a mark that ranked 74th among running backs, not players in the NFL, but specifically running backs in terms of where he stacks up. So what that means in hand is that there were, on average, the top 2 running backs on every single NFL team, and some NFL teams had 3 running backs averaging more targets a game last year than Nick Chubb. This is less than Derrick Henry had, and Derrick Henry is literally best case scenario. I think we can all agree for Nick Chubb and what you would be finding. And yeah, we're looking at this right now. Nick Chubb, 18 targets in 2020 for 12 games played. Thank God we didn't have to end this video and start it again. I had to double check that because it's so ridiculous. And in the case of Josh Jacobs, this is a running back that I've been notably lower on than most people, given the fact that he really hasn't had that elite usage in the receiving game that we thought he was going to coming out of Alabama. I mean, if you remember with Josh Jacobs, a lot of people thought he was comparable to an Alvin Kamara with what he was able to do when he got the ball in the open field and how they thought they were going to use him in the NFL, with him kind of running a ton of routes out of the backfield. And while that doesn't necessarily happen here for Josh Jacobs, it seems like he gets a massive, massive ding for it in fantasy. And I'm not saying that I'm higher on Josh Jacobs than most people. I mean, it's almost quite the opposite, because you look at the contract that they gave Kenyon Drake, and it kind of shows that they don't plan on using Josh Jacobs as an every down running back, given the fact that they give Kenyon Drake $11 million. And that is not a number for a backup running back. I will tell everybody that right now. That's a number for a committee running back. Very, very few running backs in the NFL have at least $11 million guaranteed on their second contract. That's so hard to find. So this isn't a stat that leads me to be higher than consensus on Josh Jacobs. Maybe seeing that Jacobs actually did average 3 targets a game last year makes us a little bit more excited about him. I don't think it maintains, but this is more so pointing out that Nick Chubb is such an extreme outlier. And I think we are going to continue to be aggressive in our case that while, yes, you can make the argument that he is the best pure running back in the NFL. You can make an argument that he's a top 3 running back in the NFL if you're talking about building a franchise and the talent he has in this game. But the problem is, in PPR formats, he is a committee running back at the end of the day, not getting the targets in his backfield while those go over to Kareem Hunt. So this is just a stat that really illustrates that 2 running backs that are both seen as first and second down grinders are really on complete opposite ends of the spectrum with the own production that they have themselves, where Josh Jacobs averaging double Nick Chubb in targets per game. And now let's go over to a fun stat, because I know we probably already have a lot of haters in the comment section telling me that I have low testosterone, that I am not excited enough about Nick Chubb running over some defenders this upcoming season. And I promise you guys, I know Nick Chubb, one of the most fun players to watch in the NFL. He's going to have an incredibly high yards per carry with the elite offensive line, and he is going to be near the top of the NFL in overall rushing yards. But at the end of the day, we're chasing fantasy points. We're not chasing anything beyond that. And here, let's go to our next guy, Cam Akers. Okay, so Cam Akers, I'm not even going to say this is one interesting fact. This is not just one stat that we're going to be looking at, because there's so much to look at with Cam Akers that is simply not believable. And I mean, we have talked about this before on a video, so we're going to keep it brief. But here, Cam Akers just turned 22 years old. Now, this is surprising because we know the top 5 running backs in this year's NFL draft: Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, Trey Sermon, and Michael Carter. I mean, those 5 running backs are the top 5, and it's not even close. And if you're looking at those 5 guys, Cam Akers is younger than 4 of them. Cam Akers is younger than Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Trey Sermon, and Michael Carter. And obviously, Akers has already played a year in the NFL. And if we were looking at these players in terms of the prospects they were, Cam Akers is easily the best prospect that you're finding out of himself and the 2021 NFL draft class. I mean, if Cam Akers was inserted into this draft class, he would have gone before Najee Harris. He would have gone before Travis Etienne, at least in dynasty drafts, because you go through and you look at what matters for these running back prospects. And the next thing that we need to look at is their BMI, because we know BMI definitely makes an impact on how many touches you can see on a game-to-game basis. And Akers has a 31.1 BMI, and that is higher than Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Trey Sermon, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams. It's higher than literally every single running back in this year's class out of that top 5 group. And Cam Akers at the NFL Combine ran a 4.47 40-yard dash. So he was faster than Najee Harris, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, Trey Sermon, and Travis Etienne barely beat him. I mean, Travis Etienne ran like 0.01 seconds faster. But the thing is, Etienne did that at his pro day, where we know historical times are skewed. So if you pro day adjust, Cam Akers actually had a more impressive 40 time there as well. So Cam Akers would have been the fastest running back out of this group. And Cam Akers had a 12.3% college target share. I mean, that is elite. We know that that is directly translatable to how many receptions you should expect your running back seeing at the NFL level. And here he has more than Sermon, Carter, Javonte Williams, and even Travis Etienne. So there are so many crazy things to be looking at here with Cam Akers that are honestly kind of unbelievable, especially when you put them all together and see how elite of a prospect this player was and how he just got held back to an extreme amount by that horrendous Florida State offensive line. I mean, this was a 5-star player coming out of high school. The offensive line kind of limits him in college, but still a fantastic prospect. And what's really notable about Cam Akers here is over the last 6 weeks of the season, so 2 weeks including the postseason, because we know that's definitely usable with Cam Akers as that was a competitive team in those games. Cam Akers actually averaged 22 carries a game, close to 2 receptions a game, 118 total yards, and half a touchdown a game, which would have been good for a little over 16.5 fantasy points per game. And if you're going back to the carries, remember, we already established that Cam Akers is someone with a very high BMI. He can be used as a workhorse running back. You're already seeing this when he was 21 years old, where in that stretch, he had 22 carries a game. And the only running backs in the NFL that hit that mark last year were both Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook. So just a ridiculous mark for Cam Akers at the end of the season. We know that it took him a little bit of time to get going given his rib injury to start the year. Also that he had Darrell Henderson and Malcolm Brown competing for targets. But Malcolm Brown now is gone. So it's really just Cam Akers to be there soaking everything up. But now let's go into our next stat. And this is going to be just demonstrating how bad Lamar Jackson is for running backs in fantasy. So, of course, we all understand by now, Lamar Jackson, an elite rushing quarterback, and what that does for his running backs is that allows them to have large open lanes to run through. I mean, you're going to be expecting some of the best rushing efficiency in the entire NFL for those teams that have the elite rushing quarterbacks, because opposing linebackers can't crash in when Lamar Jackson goes to hand it off to J.K. Dobbins, because they have to be worried about Lamar Jackson taking it across the edge. But here, while we can sit here and go, okay, the efficiency is going to be sky high for any running back in a Lamar Jackson-led backfield, what we also need to understand is Lamar Jackson is not someone to dump down to his running backs at all. And obviously, in the standard format, this doesn't necessarily make that big of a difference. But in a PPR format, this is close to everything. Because you look at the Baltimore Ravens the past 2 years. The past 2 years, when I remind y'all that they really had nobody to throw the ball to in their passing game. I mean, they were getting targets to guys like Willie Snead on a regular basis. And in these 2 seasons, both years, the running back backfield only had 62 total targets by Lamar Jackson. And that was second worst in the NFL in both seasons. So this isn't a one-year thing. I mean, you have that trend here clearly where we know Lamar Jackson is not going to be throwing to his running backs. I mean, a J.K. Dobbins, if he was on a different team, say he was the Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints, well, no, I don't think he would be seeing as many targets as Alvin Kamara. He definitely would be up there with what he's seeing, because we know J.K. Dobbins, with what he did at Ohio State, he can be a pass-catching running back. He's just in a scheme that it's never going to work out. Because here you look at the targets last year. I mean, the 2 leading running backs in targets were Dobbins with 24, Edwards with 13. And in 2019, you had a very similar thing. You had Mark Ingram at 29, Justice Hill at 15. So limiting the amount of targets that the running backs in Baltimore are going to see, I mean, this drastically lowers their ceiling. They have no ceiling to be top 5 finishers at the position. It doesn't matter if Gus Edwards goes down. I don't think J.K. Dobbins can get there, because we also know that Lamar Jackson is going to be getting a lot of those goal line rushes, vulturing them away from these running backs. Very similar to what you have with Josh Allen in Buffalo and what you had last year with Kyler Murray in Arizona. And here, I really want to demonstrate how good of a season that these running backs had in both J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards last year, and how it really didn't translate over to fantasy, because this is something that, you know, if you watch this channel often, I just kind of beat down on people over and over and over again, saying, I understand that these players from an NFL standpoint can be highly successful and they can be some of the best at their position, like we're talking about with the Nick Chubb. But what we also need to do is we need to combine that talent with the usage in their offense and really understand what it means for fantasy football. Because like I've said so many times before, we're not building Madden teams. We're not real life NFL general managers. We're trying to figure out how many fantasy points are going to be scored by these players. And here with J.K. Dobbins, he was first in the NFL in yards per carry at the running back position last year. Now, of course, a lot of this is to do with the fact that J.K. Dobbins is a fantastic running back. But like we said, more of it is to do with how good Lamar Jackson is at creating rushing lanes for his running backs. As we saw also, Gus Edwards averaged 5.0 yards per carry last year, which was 8th at the running back position. And I don't think anybody's arguing that Gus Edwards is a top 10 talent at the running back position in the NFL. And here, even with J.K. Dobbins coming out and having the highest mark of efficiency in the entire NFL, even with him taking advantage of what Lamar Jackson was able to open up. And like we said, I mean, J.K. Dobbins, a very talented running back prospect in his own right coming out of Ohio State. I mean, this is a running back that averaged less points per game in PPR leagues than Salvador Ahmad, Naheem Hines, J.D. McKissick, Jeff Wilson, James Conner, Raheem Mostert, and Kenyon Drake. Now, no, I'm not going to be sitting here and ranking him that low for this upcoming season. However, I really do want everybody to understand that you are having to adjust your rankings based on the fact that targets aren't going to be here. So please, please, please take that into consideration. Okay, so now this next one is a gross stat to bring up. And this is honestly a big reason why I wanted to do the videos, because when we were making this draft guide, I saw this. But David Johnson, if you take out the games where he left early due to injury, so you take out the games where he saw less than 60% of snaps, which was only 2 weeks, he actually averages 16.95 points per game last year, which was good for the running back 8. Now that's only behind Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, James Robinson, David Montgomery, and Nick Chubb. Let me repeat myself. In games that David Johnson did not leave early last year, he was the running back 8 in points per game. Now, I know that your mind is probably blown here, as was mine. And we will say with David Johnson that if Deshaun Watson does not play this upcoming season, please do not expect anything close to this type of production, because without Deshaun Watson, this is going to be the worst team in the NFL. You're going to see the efficiency plummet. You're going to see the trips to the red zone just completely disappear, because this team won't be able to move the ball down the field. And at the same time, while yes, they are moving on from Duke Johnson, they bring in both Philip Lindsay and Mark Ingram. So I'm not saying this stat to tell you to go out there and draft David Johnson by any means, but I am more so just bringing it up to go, my God, at how fantasy perceptions, including myself, are just completely off. If you would have asked me what David Johnson did last year, I would have said, well, David Johnson, he went out there, he embarrassed himself on the football field, he kind of took a crap, he rolled over, and he didn't help fantasy teams at all. And now, of course, maybe I'm just an idiot when we say this, and maybe I just didn't really understand actually how productive David Johnson was, specifically at the end of the season, because I didn't have David Johnson on really any teams. But still, that is absolutely crazy. All right, so now our next stat is going to be Jonathan Taylor, just a completely dominant running back. Jonathan Taylor, the last 5 weeks of this past season, he was the running back 1 in points per game. He averaged 26 points per game in weeks 12 through 17. That is off the charts. This is a 22-year-old running back that was possibly the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley to come out of college. We all know the athletic profile. We know the size. We know how productive he was at Wisconsin. But in that 5-week stretch in the year last year, Jonathan Taylor averaged 19 carries a game, which, that's not too impressive. But what's impressive is what he did on those 19 carries. 19 carries a game, he averaged 130 rushing yards a game. Now, obviously, that is not sustainable, but this is to show what happens when you put an elite running back talent behind an elite offensive line. He had 8 touchdowns in a total of 5 games as well. And most importantly, adding on to this, what we had to be worried about with Jonathan Taylor coming into the NFL is we didn't want him to be a piss poor receiving running back. You had to have, at the minimum, some usage in the receiving game to access top 3 overall upside for Jonathan Taylor. And that's exactly what he did. He actually averages 2.5 targets a game at the end of last year. And that was pretty much the constant throughout the entire season. And this allowed him to get up to almost 145 total yards a game. So Jonathan Taylor, he ended the year on a completely unsustainable rate, but it is great to see nonetheless. Okay, so now let's go to our last stat. This is going to be unlucky Ezekiel Elliott. Okay, so Zeke here, he was actually 4th in the NFL in the amount of carries that he had last season. And we know the number one thing that correlates season to season is actually going to be volume and opportunity for these players. And that's what you need to be chasing. You need to be chasing the targets. You need to be chasing the carries. And the one thing that's volatile, the one thing that's going to go up and down, and I don't want to call it completely random, but it is honestly much more random than any other stat in fantasy football, is going to be touchdowns. And now here, of course, at the running back position, you really have to understand if a player is going to get goal line usage, and that can predict their touchdowns. But we know with Ezekiel Elliott, this is a running back that if they're at the goal line, he's going to be in there. It's not going to be Tony Pollard. It's not going to be really anybody else. It's going to be Zeke. So we can assume that he's going to have at least a league average rate for the amount of touchdowns he is seeing per carry, because we know those carries are what's going to lead to touchdowns on a math standpoint. And despite being 4th in the NFL in carries, Ezekiel Elliott was tied for 25th through 32nd in the NFL in touchdowns. He had 244 carries and only 6 rushing touchdowns. Now, of course, this is a lot to do with the fact that you had the offensive line injuries. You also had the most important injury to Dak Prescott. So this is something that can turn around this upcoming season. And yeah, I just really want to point out that the volume and the fantasy points scored by Ezekiel Elliott, I mean, it was a night and day difference. But thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, go down there, drop a like. And if you have any interesting things that you can add on in the comment section, that'd be awesome. But I'd be surprised if that many people have stats memorized off the top of their head. Thank you so much for everyone joining the flock in Will, Wesley, Ethan, Sabres, Jonah, Austin, Andrew, Doug, Brandon, and Adam. Thank you so much, my dudes.